I was sitting under the old tree in my grandfather's courtyard when the thought first struck me. He always told me tales about the stars, the rivers,
Were
and how
these
people
ancient
used to
apes
live before
distant relatives
electricity
of
came to our
humanity,
village.
or simply
But that
evolutionary
day, he
cousins?
said something strange. Long before us, long before even the earliest humans, there were creatures that looked like apes but carried secrets about who we are.
This ingenuity
That stuck
marked a
in my
clear
mind like a
shift from
puzzle
earlier
piece that doesn't
primates.
fit anywhere.
Survival was no
Who
longer
were
just
these
physical
creatures?
strength, but
Later,
ingenuity.
when I got older and learned to read bigger books, I found the name, Ouranopithecus. At first, it was hard to even say it right. Ouranopithecus. It sounded ancient, like a word carved in stone. Ouranopithecus wasn't just a random animal. Some scientists thought it might be close to our ancestors, close to the very roots of humanity. And when I read that, it felt as if I was opening a dusty door to the past, stepping into a world millions of years old. The name Ouranopithecus means heavenly ape. Imagine that, an ape named after the sky. Fossils of this creature were found in Greece and maybe parts of Turkey, and they dated back about 9 to 7 million years ago. That's so far back, it's almost impossible to imagine. At that time, the Earth was not like today. The climate was different, the land looked different, and the animals that roamed the forests were strange compared to the ones we see now. Scientists say that Ouranopithecus was big, strong jaws, big teeth, and a heavy build. It wasn't a little monkey leaping between branches. It was something larger, more powerful, walking on 4 limbs, probably spending time both in trees and on the ground. But what made it so interesting was not just how it looked, but what it might mean for us. You see, when people try to answer the question, where did humans come from, they look at fossils, bones, and teeth. Teeth are like little time capsules. They keep the history of diets and lives hidden inside them. Ouranopithecus had thick, strong teeth, built for chewing hard foods like nuts or tough plants. That told scientists about its life, its struggles, and even the environment it lived in. But here's where it gets exciting. Some experts argued that Ouranopithecus wasn't just another ape. It could have been part of the great family tree that led to us, the humans. Could it be that our story began not only in Africa, but maybe also in Europe, where these fossils were found? That idea made debates spark like fire. As a boy, I used to imagine the scene. Somewhere in Greece, millions of years ago, there was a forest full of strange sounds. Birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling in the wind. In that forest, a group of Ouranopithecus moved between the trees. The males were larger, with powerful faces, while the females looked a little smaller. They climbed, they ate fruits, maybe cracked hard nuts with their teeth, and they watched the world around them just like we watch from our windows today. But unlike us, they didn't know they were part of something bigger. They didn't know that millions of years later, a boy like me would sit and wonder if he was somehow connected to them. That thought gave me chills. The fossils themselves were discovered in the 1970s. At first, paleontologists were unsure what exactly they had found. The bones were old, fragile, and incomplete, but enough to suggest a new species. They named it Ouranopithecus macedonensis. Later, another related species, Ouranopithecus turci, was found in Turkey. Every new discovery added a piece to the puzzle, but also made the picture more complicated. Why? Because evolution isn't like a straight line. It's more like a branching tree, with many paths, many experiments of nature, some of which ended, while others continued. Ouranopithecus could have been a branch close to us, or maybe just a cousin, something that lived, thrived, and then disappeared. Still, some scientists dared to suggest that Ouranopithecus might be one of the last common ancestors of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. If that was true, then this ape was not just a forgotten creature, it was part of our story. But the debates didn't stop there. Other scientists argued strongly that the human line started in Africa, not Europe. Fossils like Sahelanthropus jodensis, about 7 million years old, from Chad, and Ouranopithecus, about 4 to 6 million years old, from Ethiopia, told a powerful story. Africa was the cradle of humankind. So where did Ouranopithecus fit in? Was it really our ancestor, or just another ape that shared the same time in history? I remember reading those debates like it was a great mystery novel. Each fossil was a clue. Each tooth, each piece of jawbone, was evidence. Some scientists saw Ouranopithecus as central, while others thought it was just an evolutionary dead end. And I couldn't help but feel torn. On one side, the idea of humans having deep roots in Europe, in places like Greece, felt fascinating. On the other side, the story of Africa, with its rich fossil record, was strong and convincing. Which one was true? That night, when I closed the book, I kept thinking about the old tree in my grandfather's courtyard. Roots, branches, leaves? Maybe human history is just like that tree. Ouranopithecus might be a root, or maybe just one of the side branches that never grew into the trunk. But even if it was only a branch, it was still part of the tree, still part of the grand picture of life. As I fell asleep, I imagined myself walking through those ancient forests of Greece, hearing the calls of strange animals, and watching the Ouranopithecus move among the trees. I didn't know yet where the story would go, but I felt certain that this was just the beginning. The first time I saw a picture of Ouranopithecus's fossil skull in a book, I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't like looking at a monkey's face, and it wasn't quite human either. The jaw was wide, the teeth were huge and flat, and the brow ridges looked strong, like thick shadows above the eyes. For a moment, I felt like those empty eye sockets were looking back at me, as if they wanted to tell me something about the past. It was strange. This skull had been buried in the earth for millions of years, silent and forgotten. And yet here it was, resting in a museum, becoming part of debates that reached classrooms, universities, and even kids like me who just wanted to know, where do we come from? The more I read, the more I realized how complex the story was. Scientists didn't all agree about Ouranopithecus. Some said it was one of the last European great apes. Others suggested it might even be related to the line that led to humans. And then there were those who said, no, this is not our ancestor at all, it's just a side branch. The arguments weren't just about bones, they were about where humanity's cradle truly was. Most people know the phrase, humans came from Africa. That idea is very strong because Africa has given us so many important fossils. Names like Australopithecus afarensis, the famous Lucy, come from Ethiopia. Fossils like Ardipithecus ramidus and Sahelanthropus chodensis were also found there. They all tell a story that our earliest human ancestors lived and evolved in Africa before spreading to other parts of the world. But Ouranopithecus's discovery in Europe shook things up. What if the roots of humans were not only in Africa, but also stretched into Europe? Could it be that both continents played a role? I remember asking myself, why is this question so important? Isn't it enough to know that humans came from apes? But the more I thought, the more I understood. It's not just about pride or location, it's about truth. Knowing where our story started is like knowing the first chapter of a book. Without it, the whole story feels incomplete. Some scientists argued that Ouranopithecus had features closer to humans than to African apes. Its teeth and jaws looked more like the ones we later see in early human ancestors. They even pointed out that Ouranopithecus lived at almost the same time when scientists believe the human lineage split away from the chimpanzees and gorillas. That split is one of the most mysterious events in history, happening about 7 to 9 million years ago. Could it be that Ouranopithecus was standing near that crossroads? Imagine the scene. Around 8 million years ago, in what is now Greece and Turkey, forests began to change. The climate was shifting, it was becoming drier in some places, turning green jungles into open woodlands. Animals had to adapt. Some apes climbed high into trees to survive. Others started spending more time on the ground, looking for food. Ouranopithecus was there, strong and heavy-jawed, eating tough plants, fruits, maybe even roots. Did it know that survival was getting harder? Did it feel the forests thinning, the seasons changing? If humans really did come from this region, then the story of Ouranopithecus was also the story of survival against climate change millions of years ago. But then, the African fossils entered the debate. Sahelanthropus chotensis, found in Chad, was about 7 million years old, the same age as Ouranopithecus. What made Sahelanthropus special was its skull shape. Some scientists believed it walked upright, like humans. Walking upright, or bipedalism, is one of the clearest marks of being human. When I read that, I felt like Africa had a strong case. After all, if Sahelanthropus already showed signs of upright walking, then maybe the true human story began there. Still, the European side of the story refused to fade away. Another fossil called Grycopithecus was discovered in Greece and Bulgaria. Some scientists suggested it might be even older than Ouranopithecus, about 7.2 million years old, and could represent the very first human ancestor. That discovery added more fuel to the argument. It was almost like watching two teams play a game. On one side, Africa, with its rich fossils and strong evidence. On the other side, Europe, with strange fossils that hinted at an unexpected beginning. And every time a new fossil was found, the score seemed to change. As a boy, I used to picture it like a giant map on my wall. I would draw Africa, then Europe, and put little dots where fossils were found. Each dot was like a clue in a treasure hunt. But instead of gold, the treasure was knowledge. I imagined the scientists too, walking under the hot sun, brushing dust from bones, holding up small teeth between their fingers. Some of them believed with all their hearts that Ouranopithecus was part of the human story. Others shook their heads, saying, "No, this is only a cousin." It felt like standing between two voices, both confident, both passionate. And I didn't know who to believe. There was another thing that fascinated me: time. When we talk about millions of years, it's easy to forget how long that really is. I once asked my teacher, "How long is a million years?" She smiled and said, "Imagine 1 year of your life, then multiply it 1,000,000 times. That's how long." I tried to think of it. If I lived to be 100 years old, that would still be nothing compared to 1,000,000. And Ouranopithecus lived not just 1,000,000, but 7 to 9 million years ago. That was like looking at a mountain whose top was hidden in the clouds. And yet, here we were, arguing about its connection to us. Sometimes I wondered if Ouranopithecus itself would laugh at us if it could. Maybe it would say, "I was just living my life chewing plants, climbing trees, raising my young. I never asked to be called an ancestor." But maybe, just maybe, it really was standing at the doorway to humanity, without even knowing it. As I sat under the same tree in my grandfather's courtyard, I thought about roots again. Some roots dig deep into one place, others spread far and wide. Maybe the story of human origins isn't about one place or the other. Maybe it's about connections: Europe and Africa, forests and savannas, apes and humans. Ouranopithecus may not give us the full answer, but it gave us an important question: could the first step toward humanity have begun outside Africa? And that question was enough to keep the mystery alive. When I was younger, I used to think that history was only about kings, castles, and battles. But the more I read about fossils, the more I understood that there's another kind of history, a deeper one, written not in books, but in bones and stones. And if you know how to read those bones, you can hear voices from millions of years ago. That's what scientists do when they study creatures like Ouranopithecus. They don't have living animals to watch. They don't have videos or photos. All they have are pieces of skulls, jaws, and teeth buried under layers of soil. It's like solving a mystery with only half the clues. And yet, somehow, they manage to tell stories about those long-lost creatures. The most important clues often come from teeth. I used to think teeth were boring, just things we brush every morning. But when I learned how scientists look at them, I was amazed. Teeth can survive for millions of years, even when the rest of the body has turned to dust. And they carry a lot of information, their size, shape, and even the marks of what an animal ate during its life. Ouranopithecus had massive molars and thick enamel. That meant it chewed tough foods, maybe hard fruits, seeds, or roots from dry environments. That detail was important, because it showed that Ouranopithecus was adapting to a world that wasn't just dense jungle anymore. The climate was changing, and so were the foods available. And when you think about it, that's what evolution is, adapting to change. Survive, or vanish. But here's where it gets tricky. Some scientists looked at those teeth and said, these are closer to human ancestors than to African apes. Others disagreed, saying, no, this is just another ape, not on our line. The problem is, teeth alone can't tell the whole story. A human tooth and a gorilla tooth might look similar in some ways, but that doesn't mean they're directly related. That's why scientists compare dozens, even hundreds of details: jaw shape, skull thickness, brain cavity, even the angle of the face. When they studied Ouranopithecus, they saw hints that connected it to humans, but not enough to be sure. I remember reading about how fossils are studied in labs. Imagine a quiet room filled with bright lights, tables covered in brushes, magnifying glasses, and fragile bones. A fossil arrives, carefully wrapped, after being dug up in some dusty hillside. Scientists unwrap it like a treasure. They measure it, scan it with machines, and sometimes even make 3D models on computers. One tiny crack in a tooth, one small curve in a jawbone, could change the whole story of human origins. I found that incredible, that such big questions about humanity could rest on something as small as a tooth. Another thing that fascinated me was how fossils are dated. How do we know Ouranopithecus lived 7 to 9 million years ago? I used to wonder if someone just guessed. But then I learned about dating methods. Scientists study the rocks where fossils are found. Some rocks contain volcanic ash, which holds radioactive elements. By measuring how those elements decay, they can calculate the age of the rock and the fossils inside it. So when we say 9 million years ago, it's not just a number pulled from thin air. It's based on careful study, almost like using the Earth's own clock. Still, it made me dizzy to think about. 9 million years. My whole village, my whole country, all of human history with pyramids, empires, and airplanes, it all fits into only a tiny corner of that time. And Ouranopithecus lived long before any of it. The debates about Africa versus Europe kept playing in my head like a song stuck on repeat. I learned that some scientists leaned heavily toward Africa because of the sheer number of fossils found there. It wasn't just one or two bones, it was a whole series, from Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus and beyond. Africa had a clear chain. Europe, on the other hand, had only a few fossils: Ouranopithecus, Grycopithecus, and some others. Enough to raise questions, but not enough to build a complete story. I once asked myself, what if more fossils are still buried under the soil in Greece or Turkey, waiting to be found? What if one day a complete skeleton is discovered, and it changes everything we know? That thought made me feel excited, like the mystery wasn't over yet. Sometimes I tried to picture life in that time. The forests of southern Europe, warm and green, filled with apes, antelopes, and giant animals long extinct. Ouranopithecus moved slowly on the ground, using strong arms to climb trees when needed. Males might have been larger and more dominant, while females gathered food and cared for young. They lived in groups, maybe like gorillas today. But they didn't write. They didn't build houses. They didn't even know that the world was changing around them. For them, life was simple: find food, avoid danger, raise the next generation. And yet, those simple lives might have been the first step toward cities, books, languages, and stories like the one I'm telling now. Another part of the mystery came from DNA. I was surprised when I learned that scientists can sometimes get DNA from fossils, but only if they're not too old. For creatures millions of years old, like Ouranopithecus, DNA is usually gone. Still, scientists compare living apes' DNA, chimpanzees, gorillas, humans, and try to calculate when their ancestors split apart. The results suggest that humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor around 7 to 9 million years ago. And that's exactly the age of Ouranopithecus. That's why the debates are so fierce. It's like having a missing piece in a puzzle, and Ouranopithecus fits the time period perfectly. But does it fit the shape of the missing piece? That's what no one can agree on. One evening, I asked my grandfather, why do scientists argue so much about this? Why can't they just decide? He laughed softly and said, because truth is like a hidden spring. You dig here, and water flows. But you dig there, and another stream appears. Science is about digging until you find the biggest spring. I liked that answer. It made me realize that debates aren't a weakness, they're part of the search. Without different voices, maybe we'd never reach the truth. As I looked at the picture of Ouranopithecus's skull again, I felt a strange connection. Not because I was sure it was my ancestor, but because it reminded me that the story of humans is still unfolding. We are not finished learning who we are. And maybe, just maybe, the key lies hidden in a forgotten hillside, waiting for someone to brush away the dust and reveal the next clue. I once read that if you really want to understand why creatures change, you have to look not just at their bones, but at the world they lived in. That made me think, maybe the story of Ouranopithecus isn't only about fossils. Maybe it's also about the climate, the air, the plants, the rains, and the droughts of millions of years ago. The time when Ouranopithecus lived, about 7 to 9 million years ago, is called the Late Miocene epoch. I remember struggling to say that word, Miocene, until I practiced a few times. It sounded almost like the name of a faraway planet. But the Miocene wasn't a planet, it was Earth, only very different from today. During the Miocene, the world was changing in big ways. At the start of that epoch, much of the Earth was warm and covered with lush forests. Apes spread widely, living in Africa, Asia, and even Europe. Fossils of apes from this time have been found in many countries: Spain, Hungary, Turkey, and Greece. They climbed trees, ate fruits, and lived in green environments. But as the Miocene moved toward its later stages, the climate began to dry. Forests started shrinking. Grasslands and open woodlands spread in their place. For animals that depended only on trees, this was a huge problem. If the forest disappeared, so did their food and shelter. That's where adaptation became the difference between survival and extinction. Some apes disappeared forever, leaving only fossils behind. Others changed, learning to eat new foods, walk differently, or live in new habitats. And somewhere in that great shift, our own story began. I imagined Greece in that time. Not the Greece of temples and philosophers, but a Greece of rolling woodlands, half-forests, and dry seasons. Rivers cut through valleys, and herds of ancient animals, antelopes, rhinos, even elephants with long straight tusks moved across the land. In those same landscapes, Ouranopithecus searched for food. Its powerful jaws and strong teeth showed that it was already adapting to tougher plants. Unlike apes that lived only in deep forests, Ouranopithecus could survive in more open areas. That made it special. It showed flexibility. And flexibility is one of the greatest tools of survival. I read in one article that climate change might have been the very thing that pushed some apes closer to becoming human. Think about it, when the forests were thick, apes could stay in trees, safe and comfortable. But when trees became fewer, they had to spend more time on the ground. Walking upright, even part of the time, could help them see over tall grass, carry food in their hands, or travel longer distances. Could it be that the drying Miocene climate nudged apes like Ouranopithecus toward a more human-like way of living? That idea amazed me. It meant that the environment itself was shaping the path of evolution. But of course, not everyone agrees on that. Some scientists argue that Ouranopithecus wasn't moving toward humans at all, it was just another ape adjusting in its own way. Its strong jaws, they say, were for survival, not for becoming human. Others believe that Ouranopithecus may have been closer to gorillas than to humans. The debates went on and on in the books I read, but the climate story kept drawing me in. It felt bigger than the fossils themselves. One evening, I asked my science teacher, if the climate was different, does that mean we humans are only here because of weather? She smiled and said, in a way, yes. Climate changes force life to adapt. And those who adapt best pass their traits forward. Without change, evolution would be slower. So yes, you could say weather shaped us too. That answer made me pause. I looked at the sky that night and thought, the same winds, rains, and sun that touch my face today once shaped the very path of humanity millions of years ago. The Miocene wasn't only about apes. It was also a time when grasslands spread, leading to the rise of grazing animals, early forms of antelope, horses, and cattle. With them came new predators too: big cats, hyenas, and even saber-toothed creatures. Life was a constant struggle. For apes like Ouranopithecus, that meant more competition. They had to be careful, always on the watch. They weren't the rulers of the land, they were just one of many species trying to survive. And survival, I realized, doesn't mean dominating. Sometimes it just means hanging on long enough to pass your life into the future. Some scientists say that Ouranopithecus went extinct because the climate became too harsh, the forests too thin, and competition too great. If that's true, then maybe it was only a side branch, an experiment of nature that ended. But others believe that its adaptations, like the tough teeth and ability to live in open habitats, were signs that it was on the path towards something greater. Could its descendants have moved into Africa, eventually becoming part of the line that led to us? That possibility kept me hooked. I used to draw little sketches in my notebook, forests turning into woodlands, apes moving down from the trees, some of them walking awkwardly on two legs. It felt like watching a movie in my head. In one corner, Ouranopithecus stood strong, chewing tough plants. In another corner, Sahelanthropus appeared in Africa, maybe trying to walk upright. Both were facing the same test: survive the changes or disappear. And I kept asking myself, who passed the test better? The late Miocene was a turning point not just for apes, but for the entire Earth. Oceans shifted, mountains rose, ice sheets began to grow at the poles. Slowly, the world was becoming more like the one we know. That thought gave me goosebumps. Our ancestors, or their cousins, lived through those changes. They carried the struggle in their bones. Maybe that's why humans today are so good at adapting. We build houses in deserts, wear coats in icy lands, and sail ships across oceans. Maybe the seed of that adaptability was planted long ago, in apes like Ouranopithecus, when the forests thinned and the earth demanded change. I once told my grandfather about this idea that weather and climate made us who we are. He nodded and said, yes, storms make trees stronger. The same is true for people. And maybe, I thought, the same was true for apes too. As I closed my book that night, I realized something important. The story of Ouranopithecus isn't just about bones and debates. It's about how life and earth dance together. One changes, and the other must follow. Without that dance, we wouldn't be here. So even if Ouranopithecus wasn't exactly our ancestor, it still stood at the edge of that dance, in a world that was transforming. And in its struggle to adapt, it carried part of the story of us all. I used to think that Ouranopithecus was the only strange name in the story of human evolution. But once I opened more books, I realized there were dozens of them, names that sounded like riddles: Australopithecus, Ouranopithecus, Sahelanthropus, Ouran. Each one was like a distant cousin whispering from the past. At first, all those names confused me. But slowly, I began to see them as characters in a giant family story. Each fossil was like a chapter, each name a clue about where we came from. And when I compared them with Ouranopithecus, I could see why scientists argued so much. The first cousin I learned about was Australopithecus afarensis. That's the species of Lucy, one of the most famous fossils ever found. Lucy lived about 3.2 million years ago in Ethiopia, much younger than Ouranopithecus. What made Lucy so special was her skeleton. She clearly walked upright on two legs, like humans, even though she still had long arms for climbing. When I read about Lucy, I thought, here, at least, the story feels solid. Lucy was definitely on our line. She was a bridge between apes and humans. But that raised a question: if Lucy lived only 3.2 million years ago, who came before her? Who was closer to the root, closer to the moment when humans and chimpanzees split? That's where fossils like Ouranopithecus, Sahelanthropus, and Ouranopithecus come in. Sahelanthropus chadensis was discovered in Chad, Africa. It was about 7 million years old, almost the same age as Ouranopithecus. What fascinated scientists was its skull. The face looked flatter, less like an ape and more like something in between. But the biggest clue was the position of the hole where the spine connected to the skull. In Sahelanthropus, that hole was placed in a way that suggested it might have walked upright. That detail made me sit up in excitement. If Sahelanthropus was really walking upright 7 million years ago, then Africa had a strong candidate for the earliest human ancestor. And yet, Ouranopithecus lived at the same time in Europe. Two different apes, two different places, both possible ancestors. Which one was closer to us? Then came Ouranopithecus ramidus, about 4.4 million years old, also from Africa. Arti, as she was nicknamed, had a mix of traits. She could climb trees, but she also walked upright on the ground. She wasn't as advanced as Lucy, but she was older, and that made her another important bridge. When I read about Arti, I felt as if the picture was slowly forming: first Ouranopithecus and Sahelanthropus around 7 to 9 million years ago, then Ouranopithecus around 4 to 5 million years ago, then Lucy at 3 million years, and then Homo species much later. It was like climbing a staircase, each fossil another step. But the first step, the very beginning, was still uncertain. Was it in Europe with Ouranopithecus, or in Africa with Sahelanthropus? There was also Ourantigenensis, found in Kenya and dated to about 6 million years ago. Some scientists called it the Millennium Man, because it was discovered around the year 2000. Ouran had thigh bones that suggested bipedalism too. That made the African side of the story even stronger. It felt like Africa had a whole team of players, while Europe only had one or two. Still, Ouranopithecus refused to be ignored, because its age was perfect and its features strange enough to spark debate. Sometimes I thought about it like a race. Imagine a long track stretching across millions of years. The runners are different apes, each trying to carry the torch of survival forward. Most of them drop the torch and vanish, their lines ending in extinction. But one runner, the right one, keeps going and passes the torch all the way to us modern humans. Who was that runner? Was it Sahelanthropus in Africa? Or could Ouranopithecus in Europe have carried the torch for a while before handing it off? The race wasn't clear. And maybe, I thought, it wasn't just one runner. Maybe several lines ran together, and the torch passed between them in ways we don't yet understand. I like to imagine what these ancestors looked like side by side. In my drawings, I placed Ouranopithecus with its heavy jaw and large teeth. Next to it stood Sahelanthropus, with a flatter face. Then came Arti, half climbing, half walking. Lucy came after, striding more confidently on two legs. Finally, Homo habilis, making stone tools. And at the end, us Homo sapiens, building cities and telling stories. The line wasn't straight. It was messy, filled with branches. But it was beautiful in its messiness, because it showed that evolution is not simple. It's full of experiments, successes, and failures. One day, while I was reading under the courtyard tree, I wondered aloud, why can't we just find one fossil that proves everything? My grandfather chuckled. Because life is not a straight road, child. It's a river with many streams. Some streams join the main flow, some dry up. But they all matter. His words made sense. Even if Ouranopithecus wasn't the stream that led directly to humans, it was still part of the great river of life. It still shaped the world in which other ancestors evolved. I also learned that scientists use not just fossils, but also comparisons with living apes. For example, gorillas and chimpanzees are our closest living relatives. By studying their bones, behavior, and DNA, scientists try to guess what our ancestors were like. Some said that Ouranopithecus shared traits with gorillas' big jaws, strong chewing muscles. If that was true, maybe it was closer to gorillas than to us. But others pointed out features more similar to humans. That's why the argument never ended. In my mind, the debates felt less like fights and more like a giant puzzle. Each fossil was a piece, but the picture wasn't complete yet. We had Lucy, Artie, Sahelanthropus, Orion, and Ouranopithecus. Some pieces fit neatly, others seemed to belong, but no one knew exactly where. And maybe that was the most exciting part, the picture was still unfinished. Somewhere, out in the deserts of Africa or the hills of Greece, more pieces were waiting. More skulls, more teeth, more bones buried in silence. Someday, someone might dig them up and answer the question once and for all, did humans first rise in Africa, or was Europe also part of our earliest chapter? Until then, I sat with my notebook, drawing faces of ancient apes, scribbling timelines, and feeling like I was part of the search. Because even though I wasn't a scientist, the mystery belonged to all of us. Ouranopithecus might not have the fame of Lucy or Artie, but it still had a powerful role. It reminded us that the past is never simple, and that every bone has a story to tell. Sometimes I imagined myself as a scientist, walking through dry hills with a hat on my head, the sun beating down, and a small brush in my pocket. I'd look at the ground not for gold or jewels, but for tiny pieces of bone hidden in the dirt. Because that's what real paleontologists do. They don't discover whole skeletons lying neatly on the ground. They find fragments, pieces so small you might mistake them for rocks if you weren't paying attention. That's how Ouranopithecus was found too. Not in one day, not in one piece, but slowly, patiently, like building a puzzle from scattered parts. Back in the 1970s, in Greece, paleontologists were exploring areas where ancient rocks held secrets from millions of years ago. They weren't sure what they would find. Sometimes it's antelope bones, sometimes rhino teeth. But then, among the stones, they found something different. A jaw. Teeth unlike any they had seen before. Heavy, thick, strong. At first, it didn't look like much. Just a fossilized jaw, worn by time. But when scientists cleaned it, measured it, and compared it, they realized it didn't belong to any known ape. It was something new. And so they gave it a name, Ouranopithecus macedonensis. The macedonensis part came from Macedonia, the region of Greece where it was found. Names always tell a story: where something lived, what it looked like, or who discovered it. The more I read about fossil hunting, the more amazed I became. Paleontologists don't just dig anywhere. They study maps, rocks, and layers of soil first. Each layer of rock is like a page in Earth's diary. The deeper you go, the older the story. If you know how to read those layers, you can tell the age of what you find. I like to imagine the scientists kneeling in the dirt, carefully brushing away dust. Sometimes they spend days on one small spot. A fossil can be so fragile that one wrong move can break it. That's why they often wrap pieces in plaster jackets, like little white shells, before carrying them back to the lab. It made me smile to think that something as small as a tooth could travel thousands of miles from a dusty hill in Greece to a bright museum in another country, where people like me could stare at it in wonder. In Turkey, something similar happened years later. Fossils of another species, Ouranopithecus turci, were found. Again, not a complete skeleton, just parts. But each new piece made the puzzle more interesting. It showed that these apes were not just in Greece but also in nearby regions. That spread across Europe made scientists ask, were these apes common here? Did they thrive for thousands of years before disappearing? The fossils didn't give easy answers, but they kept the questions alive. I also learned about the tools scientists use in labs. It's not just brushes and chisels. These days, they use CT scanners, the same kind doctors use for humans, to see inside fossils without breaking them. A CT scan can reveal the shape of a brain cavity, the thickness of bone, or even hidden cracks. Some fossils are so valuable that they're never touched directly. Instead, scientists make 3D models of them on computers, which can be shared with researchers across the world. That way, everyone can study the same jaw or tooth without risking damage. I thought that was brilliant, turning ancient bones into digital ghosts that anyone could examine. But even with all the technology, the arguments didn't stop. One scientist might look at the jaw of Ouranopithecus and say, this looks closer to humans. Another might say, no, this is clearly more like a gorilla. Same fossil, different opinions. That made me realize something important: science is not about having all the answers. It's about asking questions, testing ideas, and sometimes disagreeing. The truth doesn't come in one flash, it comes slowly, piece by piece, like those fossils being uncovered. I remember one story about a scientist who spent years studying the scratches on Ouranopithecus teeth under a microscope. Those scratches showed what kind of food it ate. Tough, hard plants left different marks than soft fruits. From those tiny scratches, the scientist argued that Ouranopithecus lived in open woodlands, not deep forests. I couldn't believe it. Scratches you can barely see could reveal the landscape of millions of years ago. That made me feel like fossils weren't just bones. They were time machines. Sometimes, though, I felt frustrated. Why don't we just find a complete skeleton of Ouranopithecus? I asked my teacher once. She laughed. Because complete skeletons are rare. Fossils form only under special conditions. Most bones rot away, eaten by animals or washed by rivers. To find even a jaw is a miracle. That word miracle stayed with me. Every fossil we have is lucky, a survivor of time. Without them, we would know nothing about Ouranopithecus. I began to notice how every discovery was like a spark. In 2002, when scientists announced Sahelanthropus from Chad, debates exploded again. Some said it was proof that Africa held the earliest ancestors. Others said the skull was too damaged to be sure. In 1994, when Artie was found, the same thing happened. Each new fossil changed the conversation, shifting ideas back and forth. And Ouranopithecus? It kept showing up in those debates, quietly reminding everyone that Europe also had a story to tell. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that fossils are like witnesses in a trial. Each witness gives a different piece of the story. Some are clear, some are confusing, some contradict each other. But together, they help us inch closer to the truth. Ouranopithecus is one such witness. It doesn't shout the answer, but it whispers clues. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I thought, maybe part of the reason we humans love searching for our ancestors is because it makes us feel connected. Connected not just to each other, but to the earth itself. to the rocks, the forests, the climate, and the lives that came before. And when I imagined scientists carefully lifting an Ouranopithecus tooth from the ground, I realized it wasn't just a tooth. It was a bridge between their world and ours. So whenever I read about fossils now, I don't just see bones. I see stories. Stories of patient scientists, of changing climates, of apes trying to survive in a world that was shifting beneath their feet. And even if Ouranopithecus wasn't our direct ancestor, its discovery taught us how fragile and precious the search for human origins is. Because without these fossils, we would still be staring at the mirror, wondering who we really are. I used to close my eyes and try to picture it, the world of Ouranopithecus, not as a pile of bones in a museum, but as a living, breathing creature. What would it see when it woke up in the morning? What sounds would echo around it? What would a normal day look like for an ape that lived almost 10 million years ago? The books and articles gave me clues, but my imagination filled in the rest. So one evening, with my notebook in front of me, I decided to write out a day in the life of Ouranopithecus. The sun rises slowly over a wide plain. The land isn't a thick jungle like where today's chimpanzees live. It's more open, with patches of woodland and shrubs. Scattered trees provide shade, but there's also dry grasslands stretching in between. The air smells dusty, mixed with the sweet scent of wild plants. From a cluster of trees, a large ape stirs. She is strong, with a heavy jaw and broad chest. This is an Ouranopithecus female. Her baby clings to her fur, small fingers holding tightly as she moves. Around her, other members of the group stretch and climb down from the branches where they rested through the night. Ouranopithecus likely lived in groups, just like modern apes do. Living together gave safety many eyes to watch for danger. Because danger was always near. Saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and other predators roamed the same land. The apes moved slowly at first, checking the ground. The older males beat the ground with their fists, watching for snakes hidden in the grass. Then they set out to find food. Food was the main business of every day. Not snacks in packets, not cooked meals, but whatever the land offered. For Ouranopithecus, that meant tough plants, roots, nuts, and fruits. Their large teeth and strong jaws weren't just for show, they were tools, designed to crush and grind hard food that other animals couldn't eat easily. I imagined one of them sitting under a tree, cracking open a hard fruit with a loud snap, chewing slowly. Another dug at the base of a bush, pulling out roots, shaking off the soil before biting into them. The baby, still clinging to its mother, reached out for a small piece and tasted it, copying her. By mid-morning, the heat grew stronger. Some of the apes climbed into trees, resting in the shade. Their long arms helped them move easily, swinging between branches. Unlike humans, they were still built for climbing. But their world was changing. The forests were thinner, the grasslands wider. It wasn't like the deep green rainforest where chimpanzees thrive today. That meant Ouranopithecus probably had to walk on the ground more often than their cousins. Not upright like us, but on all fours, knuckle walking like gorillas. I imagined their movements heavy but sure, dark shapes crossing the open spaces, always alert, always listening. A sudden rustle would make them freeze. Safety meant sticking close together. In the afternoon, they would travel further in search of water. Water holes were lifelines, but also dangerous. Every animal needed water, which meant predators often lurked nearby. I pictured the group approaching carefully, pausing at the edge. One of the males lowered his head to drink, cupping water with his lips. Birds shrieked overhead, and antelope started nervously. Somewhere in the distance, a lion-like roar echoed. The younger apes played near the edge, splashing water with their hands, testing their balance on fallen logs. Play was important, it taught them skills they would need as adults. Climbing, swinging, wrestling. Even in the ancient world, play was practice for survival. By evening, the group moved back toward the trees. The air cooled, insects buzzed, and the smell of night flowers spread across the plain. The apes settled into the branches again, high enough to stay safe. They pressed close together, grooming each other, picking insects from fur, making soft sounds of comfort. I thought about that scene for a long time. The way they must have lived, day after day, season after season. Not in cities, not with fire or tools, but with instincts, strength, and family bonds. Of course, all of this was my imagination, guided by the science I'd read. Scientists can't tell us exactly what an Ouranopithecus did at noon on a summer day. But they can make educated guesses from fossils, teeth, and comparisons with modern apes. For example, the wear on their molars suggested they chewed hard, fibrous foods. Their bone structure hinted at strong climbing abilities, but also time spent on the ground. The environment, reconstructed from fossil plants and animals found nearby, showed open woodlands rather than deep forests. Piece those clues together, and you get a sketch of their daily life. Not a perfect photograph, but a painted picture with broad strokes. Thinking about their lives also made me wonder how much we share with them. They searched for food. They cared for their young. They protected each other. They played. And us? We still do those same things, just in different ways. We go to supermarkets instead of forests. We sleep in houses instead of trees. We use medicine and schools instead of grooming and play fighting. But the core, the need to eat, to stay safe, to care for family is the same. Maybe that's why imagining Ouranopithecus felt so powerful. It wasn't just about old bones in dusty museums. It was about recognizing that life back then was not so different from ours, even without fire, tools, or speech. Sometimes, I'd catch myself staring at my own hand. 5 fingers, strong grip, nails instead of claws. I'd wiggle my thumb and think, our ancestors survived because of hands like these. Hands that could climb, hold, gather. Hands that one day would build spears, then houses, then airplanes. Ouranopithecus didn't build spears or airplanes. But it had the same basic hands. That connection gave me goosebumps. When the stars came out in my imagination, I pictured the Ouranopithecus group resting high in the trees. Maybe they looked up at the same stars I see today. Of course, they didn't wonder about galaxies or black holes. But maybe they felt the same comfort of night skies, the same rhythm of days and seasons passing. It was strange to think that millions of years later, a boy like me would sit with a notebook, writing about them, trying to bring them back to life with words. And then the thought hit me, what if they had survived? What if Ouranopithecus hadn't disappeared from history? Would humans have evolved differently? Or would we have shared the world with them, just like we now share it with gorillas and chimpanzees? No one knows. Their disappearance is still a mystery. But for the short time they lived, they were part of Earth's great story. And imagining their daily life, waking up in the trees, chewing hard fruits, moving through open woodlands, sticking together for safety, helped me feel like I had traveled back in time. Like I had walked beside them, if only in my mind. That was the magic of fossils. They weren't just bones. They were doorways. And through those doorways, I could glimpse a world where creatures like Ouranopithecus lived, breathed, played, and raised their young, long before we ever appeared.